One of the things that I just had to say up front is that I don't know that we'll ever get a Joker that is as good as Heath Ledger's Joker. Now, so we're going to talk DC now, and we're going to compare the Batman interrogation scene or the Batman interaction between Robert Pattinson's Batman and Joker. This was a deleted scene. This did not appear in the actual film, but it was released by Warner Brothers after the film came out. Just a couple weeks ago, they released it. And I want to compare that to Nolan's version of when Batman actually interrogates Heath Ledger's Joker. We're just going to compare the two. Each one is about 5 minutes. So these are not short scenes. But I'll talk a little bit throughout to talk a little bit more about what is going on in each of them. And I'm going to go ahead and start with the Dark Knight because this is the one that came first. So let's give a little bit of context before we jump into the scene. Let's give a little bit of context as to what happens in this scene and what's the setup. Why are we even seeing this scene the way that we see it? Well, first of all, this is a portion of the movie where the Joker has been trying to wreak havoc in Gotham. So therefore, in Nolan's scene, the Joker is the suspect, right? The Joker is the one who has answers that Batman needs. And he's trying to figure out what Joker is going to do next and if he can prevent Joker from wreaking havoc on the city. So there's a little bit different context to this clip than there is in the Matt Reeves deleted scene conversation. And I'll talk about that one when we get there. But Batman is perhaps entering the scene with a little bit more anger. He also has a little bit more of a purpose in talking to Joker directly in this particular scene than the other scene, which we'll get into in a minute, and I'll explain the differences between that. So let's go ahead and take a look at this scene. And like I just did with the trailer, I'll stop it throughout. For those of you who are just listening, you'll probably be familiar with this scene. You may or may not be familiar with the scene. You can go watch it on YouTube. It is on YouTube. That's where I'm going to play it from. And I'm also going to play the Dark Knight scene from YouTube as well. So you're able to see these things. And if you go to YouTube, you can watch my video version of it as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. All right. Here we go.
Harvey Dent never made it home.
Of course not.
What have you done with him?
Me? I was right here. Who did you leave him with? Your people? Assuming, of course, that they are still your people.
Now, one of the things that I just had to say up front is that I don't know that we'll ever get a Joker that is as good as Heath Ledger's Joker. Now, this is a specific take on the Joker. This is more his chaotic side. This is showing how he likes to wreak chaos, and then also showcasing that in wreaking chaos, what his objective is to prove specifically to Batman, but to Gotham in general, that trying to improve itself or trying to assume the world is not chaotic is not worth their time. So he's a very fascinating character, especially when you take a look at that comparative to Batman in the Nolan series, who's all about order and trying to bring about order because he had this traumatic experience as a child where disorder caused him to have this severe trauma, and he doesn't want anyone else to experience those same things in Gotham, and therefore he's doing what he does.
And not Maroney's. Does it depress you, Commissioner?
So one of the things that Heath Ledger's Joker does so well is that he is causing chaos with Commissioner Gordon. Now, how is he doing that? He's calling into question the things he's suggesting to Gordon may or may not be true. The police department may or may not be heavily influenced by Maroni. And also he may have had something to do with Dent's situation. But what he's trying to do is he's trying to seed the seeds of doubt in Commissioner Gordon so that Commissioner Gordon is fearful and maybe does some things that he maybe shouldn't otherwise do.
Just how alone you really are.
So he's playing on his fears. I mean, this is I mean, this is fantastic writing, by the way. He's basically saying to a character who feels like he's fighting the good fight, and the only person he can trust is a vigilante in Batman. He's basically saying, do you know how alone you are? The only person on your side is Batman. Everybody else may be paid out and maybe not a person that you can actually trust.
Does it make you feel responsible for Harvey Dent's current predicament?
Where is he?
What's the time?
What difference does that make?
Well, depending on the time, he may be in one spot or several.
And then he subtly indicates here that he's going to explode Harvey Dent, for lack of a better term.
If we're going to play games, I'm going to need a cup of coffee.
Ah, the good cop, bad cop routine.
Not exactly.
Now, this is an excellent reveal. If you remember how this works, you turn on the light, and then Batman just slams his head into to the table.
Never start with the head. The victim gets all fuzzy. You can't feel the neck.
And this is a very classic Batman scene in that how far is Batman willing to go? One of the questions that is essential in the character of Batman is how far will he go before he's gone too far? And, the police are not going to be willing to slam Joker's head into the ground. The police are not going to be slamming their fist into Joker's palm. But Joker, obviously, as we see, loves this kind of game in playing with Batman.
See?
You wanted me. Here I am.
I wanted to see what you'd do. And you didn't disappoint.
Now, I should note here that this is not a comment on the writing or the storytelling necessarily, but I do prefer Robert Pattinson's Batman suit comparative to the Batman suit that Christian Bale had. However, I do prefer the Joker design in Nolan's Batman series as opposed to the Joker design that we see in the Batman.
You let 5 people die. Then you let Dent take your place.
Now, notice what he's telling him here, too. He's also playing upon Batman's fears. And he knows that Batman has certain fears in terms of Batman wanting to be responsible. So he's saying Harvey Dent took your place, meaning that Harvey Dent is basically dealing with the sins in Joker's eyes that Batman actually created. So Batman should have been in his place. And he's just playing on those little fears. I mean, this writing is pretty outstanding
Even
from
for a
that
guy
perspective.
like me, that's cold.
Where's Dent?
Those mob fools want you gone so they can get back to the way things were. But I know the truth. There's no going back. You've changed things. Forever.
And why'd you want to kill me?
I don't want to kill you. What would I do without you? Go back to ripping off mob dealers? No.
Okay, so that is amazing. The way that he laughs and the way that he makes Batman think that his reasoning is completely ridiculous. He basically says, I didn't want to kill you. Like you're my favorite toy. Basically is what he's saying. And this is again pretty amazing.
No, you complete me.
You're garbage. You kills for money.
Don't talk like one of them. You're not. Even if you'd like to be. To them, you're just a freak. Like me.
So there's going to be 2 things you're going to notice in the 2 scenes that we're going to take a look at. One of those things is the relationship between Batman and Joker. These are 2 people who are trying to understand the world in a way, and their understanding of the world is shaped by their experiences. And there is in both scenes this idea that they're both uncomfortable with the way that Gotham is, and one of them has learned to accept it, and one of them is fighting against it. And you're going to see this interaction is really fascinating interaction between, are we friends or are we enemies, right? Do we see the world similarly? Do we see the world differently? And how close are we, and how much on the same page are we? That's throughout both of these scenes.
When they don't, they'll cast you out. Like a leper. See, their morals, their code. It's a bad joke. dropped at the first sign of trouble. They're only as good as the world allows them to be. I'll show you. When the chips are down, these civilized people, they'll eat each other.
So here's one of we're getting in this interrogation scene, we're getting essentially the philosophical idea that the Joker has, and that is that any sense or semblance of order is easy to disrupt, right? So what he's saying is that you have this police department, they're super corrupt. Anything that I do is going to cause mass chaos. You just watch. They'll all turn their backs on you. And as human beings, I think there's this sense that we want to be a part of something, and we want to be we need to be accepted. We can't be isolated. When you see isolation in human communities, it's pretty damaging to humans, and they tend to not deal with it very well. And what Joker is doing is he's playing upon that fear, and he's playing upon that fear for someone who is going out of their way to be isolated. He's literally has a secret identity. Joker, on the other hand, he is his identity, so he doesn't care if people know him. But Batman doesn't want people to know that he's Bruce Wayne.
See, I'm not a monster. I'm just ahead of the curve.
Understand?
You have all these rules, and you think they'll save you.
So when Joker says that, you have all these rules, and you think that they'll save you. What I think part of the reason that he's saying is Batman has resorted to violence to get what he wants out of Joker. And basically what Joker's saying is, I already know your rules, and you're not going to kill me. And so therefore, go ahead and beat me up, but you still won't get what you want because you're unwilling to go as far as Joker would go.
It's in control. I have one rule.
Oh, then that's the rule you'll have to break to know the truth.
And so there you go. There you see him saying that. I only have one rule. He doesn't kill people. And Joker saying, well, you're going to have to kill somebody in order to know what you want to know.
The only sensible way to live in this world is without rules. And tonight, you're going to break your one rule.
I'm considering it.
No, there's only minutes left, so you're going to have to play my little game if you want to save one of them.
And there's the key turn of that scene, right? So as you look at a narrative arc of a scene, this narrative arc of a scene is very similar to a narrative arc of a film. It's always going to go from the inciting incident, if you will, all the way up until the climactic moment of the scene before we tail off. And this is getting to the climactic moment here where Joker has presented to Batman like, hey, this is not what you think. You're not looking for one person. You're going to have a choice you have to make.
For a while there, I thought you really were, Dent. The way you threw yourself after her.
The amount of strength it would take to throw someone over a table like that is completely ridiculous, but it's good. It's entertaining.
Look at you go.
By the way, the soundtrack is great. It's this very grating little noise that's getting at like how tense the scene is, and it increases as the scene gets more and more tense.
How about you and his little buddy? Where are they? Killing is
now that would almost certainly really daze Joker, breaking the glass that he throws him into. But of course, it's a comic book movie. Killing is making a choice.
Choose between one life or the other.
Choose between one life or the other.
Or his blushing bride to be.
And Joker loves this because he's causing chaos in Batman. He's literally turning Batman into someone who's a little bit more like him.
You have nothing to threaten me with. Nothing to do with all your strength.
Don't worry, I'm gonna tell you where they are.
Both of them. And that's the point. You'll have to choose. He's at 250 52nd Street, and she's on Avenue X. That's just rough.
And there you go. There's the power of that scene. It's a phenomenal scene. And it is a classic scene. I mean, how many times have we watched that movie and seen that scene and seen how good Heath Ledger is in that scene? So for those of you who weren't watching, hopefully you could hear the audio on that. And as I broke it down, for those of you who were watching, it's a cool memory to relive that scene. Now let's get into the other scene. So let me give a little bit of context for that scene. Let me just go back to this one real quick. the crux of that scene was showcasing the difference between Batman's worldview and Joker's worldview in the context of Batman trying to save Harvey Dent. But what Batman did not know, and what we did not know at the beginning of that scene, was that it wasn't just Harvey Dent that Joker had captured. It was also, I believe, Rachel Dawes, I believe is her name. Different actress playing Rachel Dawes in Batman Begins versus The Dark Knight. And then Batman has to now choose, and what Joker's trying to get him to do is choose one while the other dies, so that Batman will have more of a guilt complex and be forced to deal with that. Now, the next scene that we're going to look at, let's get into the context of that. Now we're going to look at it's not so much of an interrogation as it is an interaction between the Batman, Robert Pattinson, the Batman, and Joker that was deleted from the Batman film. And in the context, the setup for this exchange is different, because this exchange functions a lot more like a scene from where we might see in like Silence of the Lambs, where it's like, I need information on how a criminal mastermind thinks, and therefore I'm going to go visit Hannibal Lecter. Just change it together, Hannibal Lecter, and I'm going to go visit Hannibal Lecter and learn how the criminal mind thinks, so that I can apply that to a different case that I'm investigating. So there's a couple things here that are strikingly different, and this is one of the reasons why people love the Batman so much, is that he's behaving far more like a detective throughout that film than in any previous Batman that we've seen in live action. So we saw just a scene where Batman is interrogating Joker, but he wasn't using his intelligence to do so. He was using his strength to do so. But what we're going to see here in this next film is he's actually behaving a little bit more like a detective, and not so much as just a violent person, so to speak. All right, let's take a look at this next one. All right. Hopefully the audio is a little louder on this one, because I know that was kind of quiet on that one. Now, one of the things that's interesting about this whole scene is that clearly Matt Reeves wants to use Joker in a future film of some kind. And so what you're not going to see in this scene is ever the full face of the Joker. What you're going to notice in this particular scene is, obviously this is filmed super cool because we can see Batman's reflection here in the background, and then we just see kind of the backside, if you will, of Joker. One of the things about this film that I really enjoyed, which I didn't enjoy as much as The Dark Knight, but one of the things I did enjoy about this film is how brooding and dark it is, and a lot of times how they use silence. So they use a lot of silence to the buildup of that. So we're going to again go through a narrative arc in this scene, and the narrative arc starts out really strong. Let me know in the comments if you prefer Nolan's take on Batman and also Christian Bale's take on Batman versus Matt Reeves' take on Batman and Robert Pattinson's take on Batman. It is interesting that his jacket is labeled Arkham State Hospital.
Present.
Now, in what we can see in this blurry picture of Joker is that we can see that there are some similar design elements to the character, right? He definitely has the deformed lips. It looks as if he actually has had some sort of scarring from that. There are some indications later that we'll see that it looks like he did fall in acid, as was the case as some of the more traditional ways that the Joker looks how he looks.
There's a serial killer. I want your perspective.
So why is Batman here? He wants to get his perspective on a serial killer. So he has a relationship with Joker already, and it's likely that he was involved with, like we see in the comics, he was likely involved in some way with the Joker actually falling into the acid, and he must have some relationship here. So again, just like the first clip, we are dealing with Batman has a relationship with the Joker where there's tension there, but there's also an understanding of what the other person's perspective actually is.
First anniversary and paper.
What makes you think I come so cheap?
I thought you'd be curious. You think I could offer this stuff? Don't you? You have pictures.
So Joker's obviously trying to act exceedingly creepy here. This film treats its bad guys a little bit less. So if you look at the Riddler or if you look at Joker in this scene, these are treated like total psychopathic serial killer type of personas that are incredibly disturbing. Now, you could make the argument that Joker in Nolan's series is all of those things, but what it seems a little bit more like is that it is actually a philosophy that if it was embodied by a person, that's what it would look like, right? So this nihilistic viewpoint in Nolan's Joker, whereas this seems like a very creepy human being who is not necessarily the philosophical embodiment of a perspective so much as just a very creepy human. And that's kind of how Riddler feels as well. They have very human reasons to act the way that they do, not so much just philosophical reasons for acting the way that they do. And here we see, it's not as blurry, so we can see a lot of the scarring, again, probably from acid. Now Joker's just looking through the evidence that Batman is presenting. So Batman has actually shown up and he's given Joker some of the evidence. So whereas in the first scene, Batman is trying to solve a potential crime or trying to understand Joker a little bit better. In this scene, Batman has a very specific objective that is not actually tied to the Joker at all. He just wants his perspective on it.
Oh, it's violence. It's so baroque. Oh, he likes little puzzles, doesn't he? So meticulous. Like he's been planning this his whole life.
So this is interesting. He's talking about how the Riddler is a planner, and we know that was like a big thing philosophically between Heath Ledger's Joker and Christian Bale's Batman, was how much planning there was, and he used those terms. And it's interesting to see this Joker call that out about the Riddler, that he's a planner.
I know who he is. Oh. Who is he? He's a nobody. Wants to be somebody. The mayor, the commissioner.
So this is interesting because one of the things that Joker says is, I know who he is. He's a nobody that wants to be a somebody. And this gives a lot of vibes, a lot of real life vibes, and makes this scene so uncomfortable, is because that's a lot of times what we see when we see something like a very disturbed mass shooter. It's really somebody who's been marginalized, who really is fighting back against that to become a somebody, to be put their name in the papers. And it makes this scene even a little bit creepier, which is really interesting.
He's got ambition. You think his motive is political?
Oh, no. This is very, very personal. He feels these people have all wronged him. Probably goes way back. Unhealed wounds, stolen lunch money.
Why is he writing to me?
So this is interesting because Joker, Batman's getting what he wanted out of Joker, which is I want to understand the persona of the person that I'm going after, which is the Riddler. And you know, he's giving him a psychological profile for the Riddler, which is really fascinating.
Maybe he's a fan of yours?
Now, we don't know what part of the movie this would have shown up, right? But what's interesting is that if you've seen the film, then you know that the Riddler is a big fan of Batman's, and the Riddler feels like he and Batman could be friends because their objective is the same, and that is to root out corruption in the city. The only difference between Batman and Riddler in the Batman is that Batman has a rule where he's not going to kill people, and the Riddler doesn't care. But otherwise, there's not a huge difference. Now, you could argue that Riddler is ensuing chaos as opposed to bringing about order. You can make that argument as well, but it makes sense that they would feel similar.
Maybe he's got a grudge against you too. Maybe you're the main course. Any theories? Not yet. Really? You're normally so ahead of the curve.
The closed captions are not great on this video. He said normally you're ahead of the curb, and the closed caption said he was headless. This is kind of funny.
This time. This is very upsetting to you. Let's get back to him.
So what's interesting about this is not a Batman origin story, and you can see that Joker's pointing that out because he's saying normally you're so ahead of the curve. This is very upsetting to you, meaning that he has done this multiple times. Batman has investigated a lot of things in the past, and Joker knows about that, but he knows that this is treating Batman differently, which is some backstory that we never really get in this film, except in this scene, which is, of course, deleted.
You're so much more fun. I'm not here to talk about me. What are you here to talk about? I want to know how he thinks. You know exactly how he thinks. Have you read this file? You two have so much in common.
And here again, we see Joker is playing upon Batman's fears. So Batman's saying, I want to know how he thinks. How am I supposed to know how he thinks? And Joker's saying back to him, you know how he thinks because he's you, man. He's very similar to you. You have a lot of the same desires and a lot of the same ways of behaving. And again, he's just kind of subtly hinting at Batman that maybe Batman is on the wrong path.
Avengers. So he's even more righteous. Oh, you afraid he makes you look soft? You're wasting my time. I'll tell you what I really think. I think you don't really care about his motives, whether he loves or hates you. I think somewhere deep down, you're just terrified. Because you're not sure he's wrong, huh? You think they deserved it, huh? You think they deserved it.
And again, that basic scene is suggesting that he's trying to play upon Batman's fears, and because Batman probably does think that to a certain degree that they deserved it, right? And that's the difference, is that Batman's trying to bring about justice so that he can bring about order in the city, but sometimes justice looks like people getting what they deserve. And so, but what Joker's basically poking him and saying, like, maybe you're more of a criminal than you think you are, which is the exact same thing that the other Joker was trying to prove to him, and is sort of quintessential in the Batman Joker relationship. And that's basically it. That's basically the scene. So two outstanding scenes from two very good movies. I prefer The Dark Knight. There are some issues that I have with the ending of the way that the Batman ended. You can go watch my video on my other channel about my thoughts on that. But again, two really, really cool scenes. Let me know which scene you preferred. I think each one fits the movie really well. Each one fits the movie. Obviously, the Batman, it would have been in the Batman, and it wasn't because it was removed. But yeah, really, really interesting stuff. Really, really good scenes. And both being very talented directors behind them. And I also think that, that scene was excluded from the movie, but actually makes a lot of sense to be included in the movie. So the only reason it was probably excluded was just that movie was so long. I believe the running time of that movie is already over 2 hours and 40 minutes. And so they had to cut that particular scene, even though I don't think it was a bad scene to cut. Now, I have heard some people have a valid complaint, like my buddy Daryl. Daryl said, why do we have to have the Joker again? Can we move away from the Joker? We have had every single Batman story of all time seems to indicate that we have to have a Joker.